We're back. In spite of a little summertime cold, I need to feed the YouTube machine, so it's time to add some concrete to these forms. Let's get right into it. We spent a bunch of time trying to coordinate the pump truck and concrete here in late spring, and that turns out to be another industry in high demand in our area right now. We have limited pumping options nearby, and we learned from the footings that the Saturday upcharge was something we wanted to avoid. Lesson learned there. And incidentally, that's a phrase that will come a very strong theme in this pour too. We were scheduled for the pump to arrive at 12 noon, with the concrete showing up about 15 minutes later. This meant I was able to spend a few hours doing final prep in the morning hours, and it allowed our volunteer help to arrive at a more casual pace instead of a flurry at 7 a.m. My final checks began with ensuring all the common seam splices were secure and foamed, that the string lines to measure the wall straightness were in place and tight, looked to see that all of the bucks were supported. I even added a layer of tuck tape over the interlocking nubs to prevent contamination of concrete for when we stack the next round of the main walls. And then I went back and forth in my head about trying to secure the braces now before the pour or later. Now, I mentioned in the last video that we don't yet have our purpose-built ICF braces. Ironically, we would pick them up the day after this pour with all the frustrations of pour day fresh in our minds. Anyhow, I'll try and put together a separate video of the individual mistakes that we made during this pour and the learnings that come from this day. But in the meantime, we're using 2x4 braces against the wall every 4 to 5 feet. We opted for leaving them down initially as we needed to leapfrog some benches to stay at a good working height for the pump and the vibrators. And as the truck arrives and unfolds, we have a little powwow giving some instruction and divvying up tasks for everyone. And once that is complete and the concrete arrives, it's go time. Now, I will give one word of advice to anyone trying to do this for themselves for the first time. And that's be careful taking advice from someone who has never done this work. The pump guys see a lot, and the urge to rely on their insight is strong. But they are also in the business of doing their job as quickly as possible to get on to the next one, or in this case, go home. So if, for instance, you have it in your head that you want to do 2 lifts of 2 feet at a time, stick to it. Don't do what I did and let them convince you that everyone in the industry does 4 feet at once. You're paying for the pump, you are going to be responsible for fixing the mistakes, so stick to your plans. We were further saddled with challenge in that our pump operator was still in training, with his trainer sort of nearby. And twice, this intern tried to overdrive the pump with the truck's engine basically at idle, and it stalled the machine and the whole process. In a flat work situation, this level of experience would have been fine. But as a newer operator, he was unable to keep up with putting the boom in the right place, and I ended up fighting a lot with that elephant trunk. But the concrete is here, and we're ready to get rocking. We used a 3500 PSI pea gravel mix for ICFs and ordered it at a 5.5-inch slump. The first batch was beautifully mixed and flowed really nicely. Even as an amateur, I could see that. And at the outset, I thought it was going to be easy, which is when I should have recognized that things were about to get chaotic. Because we were filling a 4-foot lift, we wanted to consolidate everything. And it turns out that trying to insert and remove a pencil vibrator through that much concrete is hard work and nearly impossible in some areas. Had I stuck to my plan of 2-foot lifts, the level of effort would have been dramatically reduced. The second truck of concrete did not have the same free-flowing mix as the first, even though he only waited on site for about 3 or 4 minutes before we changed out to that new truck. And it was that story with the following 2 trucks as well. We started out close to that 5.5 and 6-inch slump, but by the end of that last truck, I'd be shocked if it measured anything higher than about a 4-inch slump. It was stiff. The hose was also significantly outpacing the consolidation. We were running 2 vibrators, and that was still about 15 to 20 minutes behind by the end of the pour. You can see here just how far apart things are getting. Now, recognizing how this was going, I added to the complications and handed off the hose to check up on the rest of the squad. And in doing so, I failed to give adequate insight into what was about to happen for that new person on the hose. Having been watching the pressure and flow of the pump, as well as having researched every available resource I could on this topic, I knew to let the concrete flow into the corners and at the edges and not pour the concrete right at them. Well, I handed off the hose just before an edge, and that small column in between the garage doors, and, well, here's a quick physics lesson, both to highlight my oversight in instruction, and to, again, casually warn you if you plan a project like this. But concrete pumps don't pump to the end of the hose at a defined pressure or flow rate. They simply create a pipe of pressurized concrete out to some point in the boom, and from there it becomes gravity and free fall that places the concrete. So when the boom is in the articulated position and the valve in the hose is open, that's upwards of 40 feet of free fall for that concrete to come down. Think about the pressure that will create against any form, let alone an EPS styrofoam one, and you see the problem. So while it can be worked around in the end, the garage openings are going to need some rework to fix the problems generated when that second hose helper was not aware nor instructed about keeping the hose away from the edges to prevent a blowout. Now once we finished the walls, we did have enough left over, as planned, to complete the missing sections on our strip footings that I pointed out in the last video. And since we prepaid for our concrete order, we used the last remaining bit in the truck to begin filling in the garage area that also needs to be brought up in the end about 2 feet. And that's all there is to the placement part of the concrete. Now we are in a frenzy to catch up on all the ancillary tasks around the pour. We are trading out people to do more of the vibration, as we've already discussed, that one being a bear of an effort. We also needed to smooth out the strip footings. Not super critical, as we'll also be pouring a rat slab down here, but we do want to make sure that we fill the forms nice and solid to take the weight required of them. And then it's on to the biggest challenge of all, and that's ensuring that our walls are aligned as best we can. And I'm choosing to say as best we can, quite intentionally in hindsight. You see, by pouring the entire lift at once and going so fast, we were not conscious of monitoring any lean or bow that was occurring during the pour, and we were trying on the back end to straighten and brace the walls. Now this would have been tremendously more simple if we had turnbuckles and proper braces. It would have been much more pliable if we had done 2-foot lifts, instead of that first part of the pour starting to firm up over 75 minutes sitting by itself before we got back to do the bracing and adjusting. After all, the bottom 3 feet of this is all going to be buried below grade. The top 2 feet being straight is all that truly matters, and we set ourselves up for challenge. In the end, we ended up needing to use some machinery to pull the walls straight-ish before we were able to add the 2x4 bracing. This was a bit of trial and error to get the walls exactly where we wanted them, and we lost a lot of time in this process. Now, with some exception, we are within the window of being able to sand and adjust the walls smooth and straight. Nothing's ever perfect, and this is no exception. Lessons were learned, and if there's interest, as I said, I will put together an episode dedicated to the mistakes and how we did or intend to fix them. But for now, if you've made it this far, thank you. Even the limited views these videos are getting is encouraging, and I'd love to hear from more people about their thoughts. Maybe it's encouraging, maybe it's not, or even people telling me how obvious my errors are. Part of how I like to learn is to engage with what could be done better and keep that going forward. But until the next series of chaotic mistakes in another video, thanks for watching.